Hello and welcome to another epic themed edition of Life of Die. I'm your regular host Gordon, and as always I'm joined by my fellow epic fanatic Craig. Hi Craig, how you doing?
Hiya, how you doing? I'm good, thanks.
Good stuff. And in this latest and long delayed episode, apologies to all epic fans for that, we're now going to be looking at the Tyranids. It's been put off for too long, we must talk about them. So I say we're going to talk about them, but actually I mean Craig's going to talk about them because I'm putting my feet up in this one.
Yep.
Before we get into it, just my usual disclaimer that these are going to be Craig's favourite 2nd edition 2k to 5k army lists. But I think in this occasion, because the Tyranids are fairly short, you might actually be covering most, if not all, units. So without further ado, I'll hand over to you, Craig. I believe you've got some notes to say about the Tyranids before we actually get into the meat and drink of the armies.
Yeah, just a few. They're quite a unique race. So yeah, the Tyranids were released in 2nd edition at the end of 1995. So they were really one of the last releases for 2nd edition, and as such, I think a lot of people probably missed out on them, ourselves included. I think at the time. They were released as a kind of standalone supplement called Hive War, written by Annie Chambers. And it's quite a kind of thick tome compared to the other releases like Armies of the Imperium and Orc and Squat Warlords and Renegades. It's kind of dedicated just to the Tyranids. It's full colour. It's got a lot of narrative in it, a lot of kind of history of the Tyranids and stuff like that. So it's quite a kind of cool kind of product in itself. But also a lot of it's dedicated to obviously the Tyranid rules, which are by far and away the most kind of unique of all the factions in 2nd edition Epic. They've got lots of kind of unique characteristics, and almost everything's kind of slightly skewed compared to what you'd normally expect to find with an epic army. So yeah, they're really interesting. It's kind of a bit of a shame that they came along so late that probably a lot of people didn't get to see them or play them, but it's just the way it is, I guess.
Yeah, it was teenage years were the problem really for me.
Yeah.
When I got into the epic, I was in kind of early teens, and by the time the Tyranid set came out, it was that point I was clubbing, and that was the reason I was missing out, and I was kind of doing the social thing, kind of late teens and going to gigs and stuff like that. So yeah, it was a shame that I missed out on it.
No, fair enough. I mean, yeah, it's quite cool. I mean, they came out obviously prior to things like Starship Troopers and being released, so it was like I think they probably could have ridden that wave and gained a bit more popularity if we were around at that time. But just ships in the night, I guess. I was in the Tyranids.
But here we are now.
Exactly, yeah, exactly. So we've got a second chance at it. But yeah, they're quite interesting because at the time in the 40k universe, there was only really things like there was Tyranid Warriors, there was the Carnifexes or the Screamer Killers as they're called at the time, Hunter Slayers, which are now Termagants, sorry. And there was the Gene Stealers as well, which are the kind of standalone thing in their own right, and they're only kind of later that was actually revealed that they're part of this Tyranid hive mind. And then a few odds and sods like Zotes and those kind of things which haven't made it into Epic. But it was really just sorry, what were you
Yeah, I was going to say the Gene Stealers were probably the first thing that I was familiar with, but that was through Space Hulk.
Yes. Yeah.
And then actually the first time I became aware of the Tyranids, and I don't know if it was a first appearance or not, but it was Advanced Space Crusade. We'd got that because we had Space Hulk, and we just thought, well, that'd be quite cool. Could we just bolt on the corridor sections? And they did actually fit. Anyway, back to Epic.
All I would say to follow up is that a lot of the stuff that eventually became 40k canon was actually first introduced in Epic Space Marine. It was obviously at the same time, more or less. I think in 1995 was a big year for the Tyranids in both scales. So things like the Hive Tyrants and the Lictors and the Biovores and all these other units we're going to talk about later, they all came in. I think they were released in Epic first, and then a few months later they came out in the 40k scale. So yeah, it's quite an interesting one. It's rare to see that preceding them, but here we are. So again, I've said it already a few times, they're very unique. So the way Force is organised, it still uses cards to organise the Force, but it's almost like a kind of meta game in itself, organising your Force, because each of your swarms is built around this central character as Dominatrix, which is maybe unfortunately named for the algorithm and the YouTube listening stuff, but we might get flagged for that. But yeah, so it's all built around this Dominatrix, which is effectively the kind of hive queen or the queen bee of the swarm, and everything branches off of that. And then you use these other synapse characters like the Tyranid Warriors and the Hive Tyrants to then expand your swarm out the way, and everything has to be interlinked and joined up via these arrows. And if you can't physically fit the card in off one of the arrows, it won't fit into your force. So it's a wee bit of a game in itself, building a force, which is quite cool because I think some people probably just live by building lists and building armies, so it's almost like a little way to play the game without playing the game.
Us, I think.
Yeah, definitely
The
me. I
last
mean,
few
I
months.
spent, yeah, God, my last few months, I think probably the last 25 years, I've been occasionally bringing out the cards and laying them all out. But yeah, it's a bit of an interesting one, and it does have effects on the game. So actually, even looking through the lists I built tonight, I've already realised I've not optimised it fully. So there's probably a wee disclaimer to put in before I start talking about the lists there as well. But yeah, effectively, you want everything building off. You have to have everything building off this dominatrix, and then anything beyond that needs to be built off of these other synapse creatures to maintain this kind of hive mind, and that comes into play later on as well. The dominatrixes themselves, again, it's a kind of limiting factor, but that is the core building block of all your swarms. You have to have one, and then for lists over 3,000 points, you can have two. For lists over 6,000 points, you can have three. For lists over 9,000 points, you can have four. And you're not allowed more than the number per the points value to maintain the kind of swarm coherency, I guess, and to stop you gaming out a little bit. But I mean, they are incredibly powerful units, so you definitely want them in your force, but they're also expensive. So it means, I guess, playing small games with Tyranids could become an issue. The other thing is they have these kind of hive mind cards, which are kind of similar to, if you're familiar with the chaos cards or maybe the orc mechanic cards, that kind of thing. They're just another cards which give effects to units, and you can play them at varying times depending on the blurb on them. There's some particularly powerful ones, such as like the Bio Assassin, which is effectively you just pick a unit in the battlefield and force it into a round of close combat with itself as some kind of stomach bursters trying to pop out of it, and it can effectively change the tide of battle if you were to take out one of the opponent's HQ units or something along those lines. But they also feed into the order system for the turns. So the Tyranids have a instinctive order system similar to the way the orcs would, with units falling back to default orders if they're not within coherency to be given orders. With the Tyranids, it's slightly different. That everything has these instinctive orders, which are, I can go through them quickly. They are Rampage, Hunt, and Nests. So Rampage is effectively charge at the nearest unit. Hunt is kind of advance towards the nearest unit and fire if possible. And Nest is first fire at the nearest unit. That's kind of the quick synopsis of them. There's a little bit more detail to them than that, but effectively the type of unit as indicated by its card will tell you what its instinctive orders are. You can give orders to units if you want to specifically do something that isn't their instinctive behavior, but to do that you need to play these Hive cards. And Hive cards are a little bit unlike the Chaos cards. You replenish your deck every turn, so you can play them either to use the effect of the card or to give orders to a unit. And the number of Hive cards you have is dependent on the kind of strength of the swarm hive mind network effectively. So each card, unit card that you have built off of your swarm builds up towards a number of hive mind cards. It's not quite 1-to-1. It's, for the first 1 to 5 swarms you get 3 hive mind cards. For 6 to 10 you get 4. For 11 to 15 you get 5. 16 to 20 you get 6. And 21 plus you get 7. And like I say, you can discard these cards and draw them back up each turn in the psychic phase, which is a kind of new phase that was introduced as well, I think, at this point. So yeah, it's kind of an interesting mechanic. Again, you're constantly having to manage the amount of cards, and you also have to be very careful with breaking the chain as well, because if at any point you lose one of these synapse creatures, that you can actually disconnect part of your army from the hive, and you lose a lot of hive mind cards that way. So I think it's something that we often view the Tyranids as fairly indestructible when we've looked at them purely based on the stats and things, but I think there are possibly ways to fight against them, and one of the ways would be to try and disrupt this network and reduce their ability to issue orders and to make them effectively, you know what they're going to do, which could be good for an opponent who's cunning. But yeah, that's the whole hive mind structure. Like I say, multiple swarms. So when you have multiple dominatrixes, you form separate swarms. This gives you a little bit of resiliency. It allows you to effectively lose one part of your swarm or one of your dominatrix without having to forfeit the game and lose your whole army. So there's definitely benefits to it, as well as just the fact that you run out of arrows quite quickly to join the cards on. So yeah, there's definitely a lot of management that goes on with that, I guess, and it's probably quite easy to forget as a Tyranid player as well. So yeah, it's a whole new system to learn effectively within the game, which is quite new to a lot of Epic players, I would imagine. The other biggest kind of difference with the Tyranids is their scoring of victory points. They don't score victory points for objectives. They've got no interest in objectives. All they want to do is devour and consume biomass or whatever.
Chomp, chomp, chomp.
Chomp, chomp, yes. So they effectively get the victory points for breaking a unit as on the back of the cards, as you would see normally, and then they would get you'd get the same points again for completely destroying it as well, for wiping it off the table. So it's quite an interesting one. You can still contest objectives.
Or prevent, you mean?
Yeah, you still want to prevent objectives being taken, but you can't actively take them yourself, which is quite interesting. They're also fairly immune to morale checks and stuff like that, so there's no scaring them, which is fairly understandable.
Not very helpful if you're playing Chaos against them, I suppose.
No, it's one of those, yeah, it's probably quite a hard counter to a lot of Chaos stuff, and they also have a similar thing with a lot of their units that cause terror, so if they engage you in close combat, they'll force morale checks on the opponent, which is pretty nasty in itself. The other big defining factor of a lot of the Tyranid units is the multiple wounds and regeneration factor. So we've seen it before with some of the Chaos units, the Trolls, etc., which have this regeneration aspect of them. When you kill them, they're not really dead, and at the end of the turn, there's a chance that they'll come back. The Tyranids are even nastier in this regard because they also have multiple wounds for a lot of units. So effectively, you don't ever kill a unit outright. You could stack up maybe 10 wounds on a Carnifex and knock it over. But at the end of the turn, if the Tyranid player rolls, I think it's 4, 5, or 6 on those 10 dice and bring it back up to full strength, it'll survive. As long as it's got 1 or more wound remaining at the end of the turn. Once you've done your regeneration rolls, it'll stand back up and carry on the fight, which is really nasty, and it makes them incredibly difficult to kill. Probably very frustrating to play against.
Yeah, it is.
Yeah, the focus down fire. Yeah, it's horrible because obviously if you're being swarmed and you're focusing on one unit, you've got to make that decision of, do I waste potentially more shots to try and kill this thing dead, or do I want to start picking away other units, because effectively they could all just be nullified by some nasty dice rolling. So yeah, it's a really interesting mechanic, but I guess it's probably quite horrible as well. Okay, so we'll just jump on to the lists then. 2,000, yep. So like I say, 2,000 points doesn't get you a massive amount of Tyranids because the Dominatrix, your core unit costs 500 points. So that's a big chunk of your army straight away. But it's the way it is, so can't really complain too much about it. Like I say, the Dominatrix itself is an absolute beast. It's got 4 wounds and it regenerates, so it's, like I was saying earlier, it's very hard to bring down. It's a bit of an inconsistency in the stat line. It's got a 2+ save, but in the blurb it's got a 1+ save for it, so I'm not quite sure. I checked Net Epic and it's got a 1+ save there, so I'm guessing that's possibly been errated somewhere, but it's worth checking out. But either way, even if it is a 2+ save, it's still an absolute beast. It's a command unit, so it charges in first fires all the time. Close assault factor 10. It's got a nasty biocannon, which is a 75 centimeter range, 6 attack dice, 5+ to hit, -3 target save modifier. It's got spore cysts, which are kind of close in, effectively point defense. Like they're effectively bolters, so the Tyranid equivalent of bolters for all these units is spore cysts, so you'll see that quite a lot on the units. There's also psychic powers, which I won't go into too much detail on, but they're fairly powerful. So a lot of the Tyranid units also have psychic powers. Yeah, so it's also got a 2+ psychic save, and it forces morale checks if it charges into combat with them. So it's a nasty unit. It's something you'd probably want in your force anyway. But yeah, looking at the kind of stat lines for most of the Tyranid units, they all seem very powerful on specs. A lot of them have got -2, -3 save modifiers, and the ones that don't are probably close combat units, which have got very high close assault factors. So yeah, I think there's definitely there's a lot of powerful units there. There are not many of them, and there's probably only, I'm not sure, 25 odd units that were ever released. And it's worth saying that as well. Everything ever released for 2nd edition Tyranids was in this supplement and was all released fairly close together. Nothing ever added after that. So it's a fairly tight faction from that regard. When you compare it to things like Imperials, it spread across many editions and brought with them quite a lot of kind of oddities from 1st edition. It's a lot tighter than that. So yeah, the core, you've got this Dominatrix, which has got 6 prongs coming off it, allowing you to add the 6 synapse units to then expand your force further. The next synapse unit I've got there is the Harridan, which is it's a flyer or floater, depending what you want to call it. Interestingly, it's a kind of flying super heavy tank, effectively. It's got a number of wounds as well. Let me just double check. It's got 3 wounds, yeah. So again, it's probably quite hard to kill. Interestingly enough, it can also transport a unit of gargoyles with it, which are they're the kind of assault infantry of the Tyranid force, a bit like the assault marines or something like that. They've got wings, effectively, which allow them to clear over cover, and they can drop out from underneath this Harridan as it flies along and engage with units in the ground. So it's pretty nasty in that regard. It also has this kind of infiltration move, if you like. So after setup, you can move it 50 centimeters up the board before starting the game. So it's quite slow. It only moves 25 centimeters per turn, but it gives it a bit of a boost to start with. So that's quite a nasty way of delivering some assault troops onto the board. And that's it's only got that one synapse connection to attach that gargoyle brood. It's not really used for much else. Also, hanging off the Dominatrix, I've got these Exocrines, and they're a fairly staple of the Tyranid force. They're effectively the Land Raider or the assault tank of the Tyranid force. So yeah, they only move 15 centimeters, but they've got a sort of smaller version of the biocannon from the Dominatrix. So it's a 75 centimeter 2 attack dice, 5 to hit with a -3 modifier again. So they're pretty nasty, a good kind of sniper unit. Again, with a lot of the Tyranid stuff being close assault focused, you kind of want to have a few of these in your force, I think, just to give you a little bit of ranged ability. And that said, I think there is probably a good mix, but you tend to see a lot of the stuff is a bit like Chaos. It's quite slow moving, and generally speaking, your 50 centimeters, your kind of limit. In fact, a lot of the weapon systems are just 25 centimeters. They really are designed to get in close and be nasty. The other unit I've got hanging off there is the Biovore brood. Biovores are they're an artillery unit effectively. They fire these spore mines, which effectively just sit on the battlefield and move around and come into contact with other units and blow up, and are quite nasty again with a -3 modifier. And they've got 100 centimeter range as well, so they're really a really decent long range addition. And both of those units are the nest instinctive orders, so you can just leave them at the back of the battlefield if you want, and they will just first fire at the nearest units to you. The last of the kind of synapse units I've got is a Hive Tyrant. It's a kind of standalone, big, nasty, alien queen looking thing with guns, and it's got 3 kind of hive mind connections off of it. So the Hive Tyrant itself, it's got a couple of psychic powers, it's got a couple of wounds, it's a 2+ save, it's got a venom cannon, which is a 50 centimeter, 2 attack dice, 5+ to hit, -2 modifier, gun, which is pretty nasty, and it's got a +10 assault, close assault factor. So again, it's a bit of an all-rounder. It's akin to like maybe a greater demon or something in its abilities, I guess. So yeah, it's quite a good one to have for 150 points. But it does create this kind of weak link in a chain, I guess, of the synapse. And this is what I was discussing earlier, saying that I probably could have done this better and had more stuff coming off of the Dominatrix directly and not off the Hive Tyrant, because if that Hive Tyrant's destroyed, then effectively you lose the Hive mind cards for these other broods that you've got there. So it's definitely something you need to bear in mind if you're trying to build a force
and fight against them. So it's kind of
against them. Yeah,
it's kind of key to kind of look for those things to be.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not sure what the kind of gamemanship would be there. Whether your opponent would see get to see your army and it's laid out and all these connections. But I suppose if you're a sporting chap, I wouldn't mind it. But yeah, it would certainly be certainly interesting. But yeah, it definitely needs a little bit more thought than I put into this, because I've already seen a chink in my own armor there. But yeah, hanging off that, I've got a Lictor brood. These are the kind of stealth units, scout unit effectively, that have the kind of camouflage that prevents them being shot at from, you need to be within 25 centimeters of them to shoot at them. They're also fairly decent in their own right, +4 close assault factor with a fixed save. So they're not the strongest units in the game, but they are good for sticking in a forest near an objective and effectively goading the enemy into coming into contact with them. You don't need to do too much with them. You can just use them to hold on to stuff. And they're also independent, so you don't need to give them orders as such. You can give them orders as normal, effectively. The last 2 units I've got are both coming down in Myocetic Spores, which are effectively the drop pods for the Tyranids. And these are really valuable tools. You can actually buy them for about 50 points for almost any of the kind of smaller units. They come in different sizes depending on how many models you need to transport. But they are really useful for getting stuff up the board, because again, one of the failings of the Tyranids is a slow move rate. Most stuff's kind of 10-15 centimeter move rate. So having the ability to drop stuff in on top of your enemies, it's always powerful, and in Tyranid's case, it's especially powerful. So in 2nd edition, they work similar to the way the drop pods do, where you've got counters and you hold them above the table and drop them, and they fall onto the table, and depending on where they land is where the units land. Again, this was simplified in the likes of Net Epic, where they just made it a bit more like the Deep Strike rules, where it's a simple scatter roll. So depending on your preference, I guess you could house rule that.
To be honest, I actually thought the Net Epic was a kind of complication. I actually thought it was better, because what I used to have with them when I did those scatter for the drop pods, I never actually had the spores at the time.
Okay.
But when I used to use those drop pods, I would invariably find because I think you had to hold them in your hand or something, wasn't it? Or on top of a card. And
on top of a template, yeah.
Yeah, that's right. You just flipped it upside down. But what happened all the time was that I'd usually have like at least 2 or 3 would land on top of each other, which would basically mean they would be destroyed.
Yeah.
And when Net Epic actually introduced, effectively you place the things and then you scatter each one of them, and sometimes you will get a collision, but it's pretty rare. But yeah, I always found that they kind of lasted better with Net Epic. But I would say that the 2nd edition system is quick and simple, but you're going to have more losses with it, was my personal feeling.
Yeah.
The kind of rules for Net Epic, it's definitely slower because you're basically rolling scatter for every single unit that drops down. So it's a bit of a kind of admin job.
Yes, definitely.
But does it work better overall than the previous system? Yes, I think it does in terms of the longevity of your, because it was so bad for me personally. I found that I didn't really bother using the drop pods when actually drop pods should be great, and they are great usually.
Yeah,
but
definitely.
They have been since I've been using Net Epic. Again, you're not guaranteed you won't collide, but I definitely found that an improvement, even though I would say it was more complicated and it definitely took a lot longer to deploy the pods because you were doing a scatter for each and every single one. If we ever do that in a battle report, I think that'll be a wee bit that'll maybe speed the footage up or something if we're ever doing a kind of mass drop pod landing. And same with if you had a lot of these spores, I think I would.
Yeah, well, so it's one of the interesting ones actually because of the Tyranids. You can almost do it as a tactic where you want to drop them on top of stuff because it invariably will probably kill what's underneath it, but the unit inside, especially if it's got regenerating wounds, might just stand back up. So it's quite an interesting one. And there's also probably less to do. A lot of the time you're only dropping 3 units at a time, so it's a wee bit less admin hopefully than doing a whole company of Marines. But so yeah, like I say, I tried to stick stuff in my set spores as much as possible. It is a little bit of a cost overhead, but getting stuff up the board really handy. So I've opted to stick a unit of Gene Stealers in there. I love Gene Stealers. They were again one of the first units I saw in the 40k universe, and obviously heavily influenced by, or maybe plagiarized from the likes of Alien and Geiger or whatever. So it's they're cool. I've got to have them in there. They're also an independent unit, so when units come out of the mycetic spores, they come out on their instinctive orders. So with the Gene Stealers, I don't think you can have them charging in. I could be wrong, but I think they come out a little bit in the same way that other units would come out, in the way that the Marine drop pods work, where they come out in advance orders effectively. So it's not something you maybe want to drop on top of the enemy. You maybe want to drop them behind enemy lines somewhere, then get them into position and then launch your attack. The Carnifexes, on the other hand, or the Screamer Killers, depending on what your age range is, they are absolutely ones you want to drop on top of the enemy. They come out on charge orders, and they have a +7 close assault factor, and they're just generally horrible units to get into close combat with. They'll tear through most things. So yeah, that's what my other drop pod unit, or is my other spore unit, is the Carnifexes, and again, they're one of these units which I've always loved. They often come up as one of the most kind of ugly and worst designed models that GW have ever released, but I love them. I think they're great. So I've got their consistency in my force for sure. And also they are just good in the game as well.
Yeah, I like the model as well.
Yeah, I know it's a funny one. I always see that. I don't know if it's just YouTubers looking for clickbait, but you always see it as a thumbnail of like the ugliest Warhammer units. That and the Fantasy Nagash unit always comes up. But like, I don't know. Yeah, Carnifexes, they're cool for me, so it's fine.
Oh, I agree.
Good stuff.
So that's your 2,000 then?
That's a 2,000. Yep. 3,000 is a bit more interesting. So 3,000, I've still got that Dominatrix in the centre of it. I've still got the Harridan and the Gargoyles because, great close assault troops, pushing them out of the board. I've still got that same Hive Tyrant with the 3 birds hanging off it, the Lictors, and then the Gene Stealers and the Carnifexes in their spore pods. I've also taken a Hierodule this time, which is the smaller of the Biotitans. So again, the Tyranids have got a couple of Titans kind of along the lines of the Reaver and Warlord, effectively, I guess, in terms of their points and I guess their scale. I've actually only got the smaller one in my collection, but I think it's probably the one I'd take anyway. So they can be outfitted with a number of fairly kind of nasty weapons. I think that it takes 3 weapons on the Hydril, 2 weapons on the Hydril, as well as it's got 2 mount points for weapons, and you can take cluster spines, bio launchers, razor claws, bio cannons, ripper tentacles, spore pods, pyroacid spray, stinger salvo, and frag spines. So I can talk a little bit on what sort of weapons I'd probably take. Yeah, so again, I think with the Biotitans as they stand, well, you can either specialise them for like close combat or to be kind of long range attack, I guess. They've got a +10 close assault factor off the bat anyway, and 6 wounds. So they don't have void shields in the same way that sort of Imperial Titans or Hollow Fields like the Elder Titans. They just have lots of wounds and regenerate, and they just have a kind of armor save rather than on the same sort of chart. So again, going for the smaller, the Hierodule Titan has a smaller template, and therefore it's probably more likely to scatter. So that's along the lines of my thinking for taking the smaller one. For the points value, it's a bit less of all your eggs in one basket. So yeah, there's a few nasty weapons. There's a pyroacid spray, which I think you've came across before from memory, and it's a kind of template weapon. I think it's maybe 25 centimeters, similar to the Flamer template, but it looks like maybe an ice cream cone. It's got a couple of extra balls on the end of it, and it's just a nasty weapon that hits on a 3+ and does a -2 damage. And I think it can also take down buildings as well. So yeah, it's a pretty horrible close-in weapon, that one. I would probably also just take a biocannon, as boring as it is. It's the kind of consistent 3 attack dice, 5+ to hit, -3 kind of weapon. But the addition that the Titan class weapon, or the biocannon, has is it's got +1 penetration on it. So if you're attacking Titans, you add 1 to the damage roll, which is quite nasty. So I think I'd probably have that as a kind of Titan killer weapon. The other weapons, I'll be honest, I've not played about with them much, so I'm not sure whether I'd take them or not, but there's the usual kind of barrage weapon, close in, kind of close assault factor, adding weapon. So it's really player's choice what you want to take there, but they're all pretty decent depending on how you're building it up. But yeah, I would probably take the pyroacid spray for close in action and the biocannon for some long range stuff. Also hanging off the Dominatrix, I've got the Zoanthropes. So they're the kind of dedicated psychic unit of the Tyranids. They're kind of like a big brain on legs. Not very pretty to look at, but like most stuff in the Tyranid force. But they've got a Warp Blast, which is effectively just another 50 centimeter, 5 or 6 to hit, -6 target save modifier. I guess the nasty thing about it is that it fires off in the psychic phase, which happens before the combat phase. So it's a good way of effectively getting a shot off before any of the even first fires have had a chance to do anything. So I guess that's the kind of the main reason for taking them. They've also got a 5+ fixed save, which is quite good. I mean, a lot of the stuff in the Tyranid army isn't a fixed save, but they don't have regeneration as such, but they are probably still quite hard to kill. There's only 3 of them in a brood though, so yeah, I can see why people don't necessarily like them that much, but yeah, I'm going to take them. The last synapse unit I've got are Tyranid Warriors. Now, I didn't really discuss them that much previously, but they are 5 Tyranid unit, effectively 5 stand unit. I think they're the smallest or one of the cheapest synapse units that you can take. In fact, no, they're not. 200 points. So they have 3 synapse or 3 hive mind connection points coming off them, so they're good for building out the force. They have a kind of special rule where any other unit within 10 centimeters of them, well, one unit within 10 centimeters of them can share their order. So it maybe saves you a hive mind card that way if you wanted to give another one of the units the same orders as them. Other than that, yeah, they're a 6+ fixed save, 5+ close assault factor, Death Spitters they've got, which is a 50 centimeter range, 2 attack dice, 5+ -1 to hit. So they're not outstanding. They're kind of a decent kind of infantry unit or decent all round unit. But you're really using them to expand that hive mind ability and to get that kind of free order. I think that's probably why you're taking them most of the time. And hanging off those guys, I've got the Exocrines. I've got 2 broods of them this time, just because I do find them to be one of the most kind of consistent units. That kind of biocannon is decent, and I've also got the biovores hanging off those guys. So effectively, that whole unit, that whole Tyranid Warriors, 2 Exocrines, and the biovores form a kind of unit by themselves of advancing up the board, or with the Tyranid units being able to hold back and give them orders if they need to target a specific unit rather than using the instinctive orders. So that's my 3,000 point list.
Nice, flying through these.
Yeah, there's probably quite a few similarities in most of them. Again, because of the sheer number of units that the turns have got, you can't have too much variety, but I've managed to squeeze most of them in, hopefully. Yeah. 4,000 points. So this is where I'm going to start taking advantage of the multiple dominatrix thing and splitting my hive into 2 swarms. So I've got 1 swarm, a smaller swarm, which has 3 units of mycetic spores. 2 of them are carrying Carnifex broods, and 1 of them are carrying Gene Stealers, so that would be my really kind of up-the-board assault force. And then the other unit is the Harridan with the Gargoyles again, which again is just something I always take. The other Dominatrix is a much more fleshed-out swarm, and this time I've got the Dominatrix, I've got the Hydro kind of smaller Titan, Bio-Titan. I've got the 2 units of Exocrines and the Biovores, and the Zoanthropes the same as before. Got the Hive Tyrant with the Lictor Brood as well, which again is just that good unit for denying objectives, I find, and being kind of annoying. I've got the Tyranids again, but the Tyranids this time are taking with them 2 broods of Termagants. And the Termagants are the total archetypal swarm unit, effectively. You get 10 stands of them for 150 points, and they're kind of just like, they look like little doggies, little ugly dogs. They're not fantastic in any way. They're only a +1 calf with a 25 centimeter range in their weapon, 1 attack dice, 5 plus to hit, no save modifier. So they're almost that classic stat line that we've talked about many times. But I think in this case they kind of work because you get 10 of them for 150 points, and they're great just for screening. Effectively, you can screen your Tyranid warriors or your other infantry class units behind them and use them as a meat shield, and just effectively just throw them away to get torn up while your other units get close to overrun them. So yeah, I think that's the way to play them. But again, having 10 of them in a group, that close assault factor and those extra dice mount up pretty quickly, and you can overwhelm units with them. So they're definitely one to add in where possible. And again, I've not used it tonight at all, but I'm going to say they're iconic. They were one of the first. They were the hunter slayers before they were the Termagants. So they've been in the lore for a while. So got to bring them along.
I was wondering if we were going to get one tonight.
I've noticed I've said nasty quite a lot, so that's going to be my number one. Nasty and iconic. That's the Tyranids. And that's, rattling through it. That is my 4,000 points. So like I say, this is where the Hive splits in two and it starts to become a bit more interesting, I guess. And then for my final 5,000 point swarms, I've got... Let me try and just spot the difference here. Yeah, I've got a lot of the same stuff, unsurprisingly. I've got those Tyranid warriors with the 2-heart Termagant broods hanging off them. I've got the smaller class Titan. I've got the 2 units of Exocrines and the Zonothropes hanging off the Dominatrix in the first swarm. I've got that Hive Tyrant with its Lictors and Biovores this time. And then I've got the Harridan with the Gargoyles. So again, it's a fairly... I don't know. It's a pretty decently compact swarm, utilizing all of the points coming off the Dominatrix in that first one, which makes it obviously pivotal to the force, but probably makes it a little bit tougher to break as well. On the other swarm, I've added in a few extra bits and bobs just to spice things up a bit. So this time I've got the Dominatrix in the center, of course. Coming off that, I've got 2 of these Turgons. So they're effectively a super heavy standalone single model unit. They're pretty horrible. They're 20 centimeter move, 1+ saving throw, close assault factor of 8. But they've got this Bioshock template that kind of sits out in front of them, kind of, I guess, a bit like the Wave Serpents for the Eldar. So they can effectively roll over anything they come in contact with and potentially destroy it or blow away its turn. And they've got a kind of D6 based save modifier as well, so it depends on what you roll there, how far you can fire it, and what the modifier is. So it's a wee bit maybe inconsistent. It's a bit like, it's almost like an orc weapon in that regard, where you're kind of rolling to see how far you can fire it and how far it does the damage. But just having that 1+ save makes it, I was about to say nasty again. I need to look up a thesaurus here, but it's it's kind of threatening, I guess. That's what I'd say. So I've got 2 of those. They're only 100 points each, and they've got that hunt order, so they will just kind of move forward and attack at will. So I've brought a couple of those, and they look quite cool as well. They're kind of like slugs with mandibles, so yeah, bring them along. I've got my Hive Tyrant again with the Mycetic Spores as before, with the 2 Carnifex broods and the Gene Stealers. Again, I would bring more Carnifexes if I had the models for them. I think I'd have a whole swarm of those, I think. And then at the bottom of the second swarm, I've got another Hive Tyrant. So Hive Tyrants, again, I've talked about them before. They're pretty good all round. They've got some psychic powers and decently tough, so they do tend to form the building blocks for my Synapse units. And hanging off of those guys, I've got 3 new undiscussed units thus far. I've got the Malefactors, which are... They're the transport tank of the turn. There's not many things that can sit inside a slug, but apparently they've got some sort of cavity, which we won't hopefully go into too much detail on, but they can carry 2 stands with them and move forward with a 20 centimeter move, 2+ save, +5 close assault factor. They really are a close assault vehicle, so the idea is you use them to get your troops up the field and then use them to then support those troops in close combat. And I'm taking them, and I'm also taking a brood of Hormagaunts. So the Hormagaunts are, again, they're a little bit of a, maybe not a throwaway unit, they're a fairly cheap unit. You only get 5 stands of them. They're effectively the close assault version of the Termagant. So they've got these claws. Again, it's just a 2+ close assault factor. No weapons, but their thing is that they move triple on charge, so they move 30 centimeters on a charge. So again, the idea being that they're inside the Malefactors, with giving them a little bit of protection. They get up the board and then they dive out and charge into combat. So that's my reasoning for bringing those. And supporting those, I've brought a brood of Horospecs. So Horospecs are another similar to the Malefactor, but without the transport capacity. They're another close assault unit. So 15 centimeter move, 2+ save, +7 close assault factor, and they've got acid jets and frag spines, which are again 25 centimeter weapons with one of them's got 2 attack dice, 5+ to hit, -2 TSM, and the other one's just a barrage weapon. So using them in conjunction with the Horspecs and the Hormagaunts to really deliver this kind of close assault force. That's the reasoning behind that. And that's my army. That's my 5,000 points. And it more or less, well, it is, I think it's everything I own for the Tyranids, coincidentally, for second edition. There's a few things that were added in Net Epic that I've got as well that I've not obviously included here, but there's not too much. But yeah, that's almost everything that you can get for the Tyranids in second edition. The only units that I've omitted from talking about tonight at all is the bigger Titan, which is the Hydrophant. And again, I don't have it, so I'm not going to, I can't field it, but I think I'd probably still take the higher duo. I think there's definitely a case for taking it in bigger points games for sure. I think at 5,000 points, I probably would take one if I had one. If I don't have it, the only other unit I don't have is the Dactylus, which is it's another artillery unit effectively. It's a 75 centimeter range, 3 barrage point, -2 TSM unit, so you'd use that essentially like a Basilisk or something like that, a wee bit closer in, I guess. But yeah, I'd definitely include some of those if I had them, because I think having more artillery units in the Tyranid force is definitely helpful given the close assault focus of them. So yeah, it gives them a bit more range and a bit more versatility. But yeah, I think that's everything covered that was ever released for them. It's like I say, it's a totally concise force. There was never anything released after that, so it's a good one. It's an interesting one. Certainly one that I've not played with enough. We played one game in Net Epic using them, and I don't know if I played them totally right. Found them very tough. And I know you've had some experience with them. Was that second edition or was that Net Epic you played against them?
I think it was Epic, I think it was. But yeah, they were brutal, and I probably didn't do my research well enough, to be honest. I think it's more, I was kind of just thinking, well, this is the same as, do you know what I mean? Like most of the armies, it's pretty much, you don't have to worry about the kind of regeneration stuff so much, and I wasn't aware of the whole structure. I just hadn't done my homework. I think actually one or two of the times I didn't know I was even playing against them, and it was just bring whatever you like, and I get caught out that way. Whereas, like, do you know what I mean? If you're playing against Marines or Eldar, you kind of know these things are for close combat. These are ranged tanks that sit back or Titans that sit back, and you kind of get a very good idea when you see somebody setting up, even if there's a couple of things that are. But I think partly because of the way the miniatures are as well.
Alien.
Exactly. That it's kind of harder to kind of understand what it is they do if you're not clued up.
Yeah, it's something I find it's almost it's something you can almost chart through the chronology of them. But when you look at the original units released prior to this in 40k, when we were talking about earlier, the Gene Stealers, the Screamer Killers, the Tyranid Warriors, you look at them and you can kind of see what they are. They're quite distinctive. They all had their own identity. I think with the release of Epic, when you look at the release of the units in Epic, a lot of them were obviously built specifically for this. They've never really been seen of again since. I think some of them have made it into 40k, but a lot of the things like the Exocrines and the Malefactors and Horspecs and these tank units or these kind of vehicle units effectively, they're obviously specifically built to fulfill a purpose in the game, and I think the lore was probably built around them afterwards. But I just don't know if they've got that same sort of personality that you see from some of the other units. They're a wee bit samey. They've just got maybe different arms or different backs on them or different claws. You know, it doesn't really bother me too much because I think they're still quite cool models. I don't have that same nostalgia for them that I do for most of the other things, but you can kind of tell by looking at them what they are. I think nowadays, if I was a 40k player, which I'm not, but if you look at the 40k Tyranids, they're almost completely modular. Everything looks the same to the point where if you see a really nicely painted Tyranid army, it just looks like a big blob. And I don't know if that's intentional or not, but to me, they've kind of lost what little character they maybe had in the very early days of their units, and now they've become so kind of homogenous, it's really hard to tell. So I would hate to be playing them now and trying to work out what everything does. But yeah, I think even especially at epic scale, it's probably difficult to tell right off the bat what things do. And again, maybe just because we didn't grow up with them effectively, but it's maybe difficult to look at them and try and work it out without just looking at the stats and stuff for them. So yeah, I can totally see how you get caught off guard by them.
Yeah, as I say, it was when they were fielded when I didn't know I was going to be fielded. That's my fault as a player.
Yeah, it's something that's kind of consistent throughout wargaming, is you always need to know your enemy's force as much as you do yours, but I guess at the time, if these were like a new release or whatever, then it might not be that everyone's seen them or read up on them, and it's in the infancy of the internet, so finding out these things probably would have been a nasty surprise for a lot of people in 1985 to come up against this and not be able to kill anything, which I imagine was probably quite annoying.
Demoralised.
I think we've probably played them a wee bit wrong previously and maybe made them more powerful, because I don't ever remember doing the Hive Mind cards properly. I think I was just using them like the Chaos cards, almost like we just drew them up and then used them. I didn't appreciate the order, the reliance on them for giving orders, that kind of thing. So I think I was just giving everything orders, which obviously makes them super powerful. I think tactics for playing against them we could probably talk about. I think obviously trying to break up that hive mind structure to reduce those number of cards to make them effectively do what they're doing by instinct would make them a little bit more easy to manage. And if you've got perfect information and you know what your enemy's going to do when you're placing your orders, then it probably gives you a massive advantage. It might not help if they're still going to shoot at you with a -3 save modifier and 3 dice or whatever, or a +10 close assault factor, but at least you can make best efforts to get out of the way of it or something. I think that's how I would play against them, and I think that's how I would play them, but I'm not sure. It'd be really interesting to hear from anybody who has used them kind of in their infancy to find out how they played them and or how they played against them, because it's a really interesting one for me. Like, yeah, let's see, I've got them through. I've picked up a collection. It's a bit of a mishmash collection over the years of stuff. Get this kind of force, and I think it's fairly well balanced. Maybe I'm not sure. I've not really paid too much attention to them. It's a funny one just because I don't have that burning nostalgia for them. I've not really felt the need to go out and get absolutely everything for them, although I've kind of done that by accident almost. But but yeah, they're quite an interesting one. It's definitely one. I mean, I say this every week or every time we talk about it. It's definitely one I do want to play again at some point.
Yeah,
really give them a go, because I do find them kind of interesting and completely different to anything we, if you're in any way, shape or form bored with Epic or the armies you've got, then I would definitely think giving Tyranids a go could be an interesting one.
Yeah, so I think I'll never be bored of Epic, but I'm hoping in the coming months we're going to be able to get some games in.
Mm-hmm.
So that's the Tyranids then. The next episode will be just questions from the community. So wherever you find this podcast, just drop us a comment and tell us if there's a question you have about 2nd edition Epic or Net Epic. One of the things I will definitely be talking about, and it is because I get asked this a lot, is why is it I keep talking about Net Epic over 2nd edition? What is it that's so much better or interesting about Net Epic? So I will go through some of those kind of major differences. But yeah, if you have questions, please drop them whenever you see this. And thanks to Craig for sharing his insights in the Tyranids. Really enjoyed listening to that. Sorry I wasn't able to contribute much.
No, that's fine. That's fine. You got a week off with the squats, so
yeah,
makes sense. It's only fair.
So yeah, thanks for all that, Craig. I really enjoyed it. And until that next episode, keep on living the life of Die.